Speaker, I rise today to speak about regional roads and specifically the past practices of the former Labor government regarding the reduction of speed limits rather than spending money on maintaining them. As recently as September 12 last year, the Weatherall Labor government dropped the speed limit on another 8 of the state's regional roads, citing road safety concerns. Well, pre-election, the Liberals vowed to reverse the decision on those 8 roads, and should it win office, they vowed to reverse the decision on those 8 roads if they win office. Mr Speaker, I specifically rise today to point out the flawed arguments around such decisions and to emphasise the Liberals' intention to review all speed limits on all major country roads, understanding that crashes are caused by a wide range of factors other than speed, including inattention and fatigue, drug and alcohol use, and whether you've got animals in your way you have to swerve to avoid to miss, and a range of other factors. At this time, Mr Speaker, I am specifically advocating for 110-kilometre speed limits to be reinstated promptly on at least the regional roads that have been upgraded significantly in the recent past. Since decisions were made in 2011 to lower speed limits, and quite clearly there are a few roads good enough to travel at 110 kilometres an hour, Mr Speaker, because we now have 36.5-metre road trains travelling on those roads. Since that decision was made, there has been quite a bit of work done on a couple of roads in the electorate. I speak specifically of the Copper Coast Highway and the York Highway, and also the Butte to Colpara Road, as roads that are now of an obvious standard which would allow them to be returned to 110-kilometre-an-hour speed limits. Works on the York Highway have been completed just a couple of months ago, and after the current works that are near completion along the Pascoeville to Colpara section of the Copper Coast Highway, there is no reason why the Copper Coast Highway itself cannot be reinstated to 110 kilometres an hour as well. I was pleased to welcome the announcement on 18 May that the works on the York and Copper Coast highways will enable 36.5-metre road trains to use them and have been completed, which will increase efficiencies and productivity all round, and now means that the York and Copper Coast highways are restriction-free heavy vehicle networks. It surely now follows that the speed limit on these roads can be reinstated to 110 kilometres per hour for cars, because if they are good enough for these big trucks to use, they are good enough for all vehicles. Every time I'm heading home from Port Wakefield and get to the York Peninsula Junction off Highway 1 and see the speed limit drop by 10 kilometres, it seems ludicrous. As I'm on a good conditioned road with adequate shoulders, particularly since major works have occurred there since the decision was made back in 2011 to drop the speed limits, it seems all the more ridiculous. Yes, the Liberals have committed to reviewing speed limits on rural roads, and in high time, since 7 years have gone past since the 2011 decision was made. The more than 350 kilometres of road targeted back then in 2011 included the 60-kilometre stretch from Port Wakefield to Wallaroo, the Kadina to Port Broughton Road, 78-kilometre stretch from Ardrossan to Yorktown, the 54-kilometre stretch from Ardrossan to Moonta, and there were 4 of 45 sections of state rural roads, 723 kilometres in total, that were reduced from 110 kilometres an hour to the default rural limit of 100 kilometres an hour, along with 7 local government road sections. Why were they reduced? To save lives, Mr Speaker. Between 2006 and 2010, there were reportedly 290 casualties, crashes on these roads, and 22 people died and 121 sustained serious injuries. 6 of those fatalities occurred on the York Peninsula. My research shows that just since 2015 there have been 11 fatalities on the York Peninsula, up by 5 on the 2006 to 2010 numbers, since the speed limit reductions. And whilst I don't have the number of serious crashes, my argument is that any available stats are difficult to analyse because stats don't show the speed vehicles were travelling at the time of the crash or what other mitigating factors cause injuries or fatalities. As announced prior to the election, the Liberal Party is committed to using mining royalties to fix SA's neglected regional infrastructure under our Royalties for Regions policy, quarantining 30% of mining royalty revenue for a dedicated regional roads and infrastructure fund. This is an exciting policy for us, and as stated by the Civil Contractors Federation SA Chief Executive Phil Sutherland at the time of our announcement around the Royalties for Regions program, our road network in SA is nearly 50 years out of date and it needs a lot of investment and attention. Adding, if we can get the regional road network up to speed, that will surely stimulate regional economies.
Member for Light.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, today I rise to talk about one of my constituents who today celebrates his 102nd birthday. Sid I was born on the 31st of May 1916 to Elsie Dawkins and Lewis I. He was one of 4 siblings with brother Will and sisters Kath and Muriel. Sydney's first home was at number 4 Moore Street in Gawler and has lived in Gawler for his entire life. Sid was educated at Gawler Primary School and then worked with his father at the chaff mill, which was located at the site that Coles supermarket now sits in the heart of Gawler. It is remarkable as to see how much Gawler has changed since that time. Sid remembers a time where wagons carried by horses used to travel to Gawler from surrounding areas carrying wheat and barley to be loaded onto trucks to be sent to Port Adelaide. Sydney also remembers his grandfather's 1924 Ford Buick. Sid studied wool classing and had the opportunity, once qualified, to travel extensively across South Australia. It is remarkable to think that Sid lived during the era of Don Bradman and Phar Lap, although he's not a gambler himself, and at a time when the town of Gawler catered for horses by providing water troughs in front of Ward's shop, as late as 1950. It is an era that is so long ago, but yet Sid remembers it quite fondly. His recollection of his early life is truly interesting and a door into the past, and he has a very vivid recollection. At the commencement of Second World War, Sid enlisted into the Army along with many others from the town. Sid joined the Field Ambulance Service after meeting 2 Army officers in Gawler, who informed him that they were developing this unit. Sid, who did not know much about the Army at the time, decided this was a good fit for him. I don't think he ever had any regrets. Sydney received his early training at Wayville and was initially deployed to the Gaza Strip and was later deployed to Tobruk, which went under siege. He remembers one night in particular when he was looking after a patient with a broken leg in the hospital. Because this patient had a broken leg, he was unable to be evacuated to the air raid shelter when the siren sounded. Sid decided to stay with the patient to try and stop him in case he tried to get out of the shelter. He remembers sitting with his patient during the bombing. He remembers it being an incredibly nerve-wracking period, but thankfully neither were hurt. I could not imagine, and I think it would be difficult for many of us to ever imagine ourselves hiding in a building which was under attack. The bravery that Sid displayed on this occasion is simply inspiring. Tobruk was under siege for 6 months until they were relieved from duty. Sydney remembers that water use was rationed and that they were only allowed 1 quart of water a day for drinking and shaving. It must be incredibly difficult to live on that amount of water and have been incredibly careful with how it was used. Sid also served in Palestine for 12 months, in addition to Syria and Lebanon afterwards. Sid remembers when he was in Alamein where they established a dressing station close to the coast. One night there was a bombing raid, and in this instance, 1 bomb landed in the salt marshes. The next thing he knew, a swarm of mosquitoes came through the camp. He remembers this period was very hectic, and there were many people who were bitten that kept him very busy that night. Sid remained with the Army for many years, serving in New Guinea, where he caught dengue fever, before rejoining the unit. Sydney remembers the emotional moment when he surprised his parents on his return home. Sydney finished his military service with the rank of Sergeant in the Field Ambulance Service. He witnessed the horrors of war from the front line, and he witnessed the loss of many good people, including many nursing and medical staff. I think it is incredibly important to acknowledge the work of medical staff in our military, as they too experienced the trauma and brutality of war. They played an important role in making sure that soldiers who were injured had the care they needed, and to ensure that those who did not make it home were treated with dignity and respect. I would like to acknowledge Sydney's military service today. I would also like to acknowledge the military service of those from my electorate who served in the armed conflict throughout past and modern conflicts. Sid enjoyed playing tennis and used to play in his early years when he returned from the war. He's a member of the Todd Street Tennis Club for many years. Sydney believes he was a reasonable player. 102 years later, Sydney is still with us. And I would like to acknowledge the work of the Gawler Oral History Project, in particular Mr Barry Nyland, who this year sat down with Sydney and spoke to him about his life and his connection to the local community. On behalf of this Parliament and the community of Gawler, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Sydney a happy 102nd birthday and hope he has a fantastic day with family and friends.
Member for Cavell.
Mr Speaker, I rise to acknowledge in this place the contribution made to my community by Mrs Doreen Pope, whose 100th birthday fell on the 12th of May 2018. It was an honour to join Mrs Pope, friends, family and many community leaders at her birthday celebrations in Lobethal.